and how we interface with districts. Also want to talk about parents' rights and where you enter into both of these processes and address any questions that you have as we go through. We'll go about maybe 35 minutes on the slideshow and have ample time for questions and conversation as needed. So let's start with these two different acronyms and what they mean, because acronyms are what we do in special ed. So probably most of you are familiar with the Individualized Education Plan, a formal legal document that is authored by the districts, which we'll talk about in just a moment. In our current student population, about 70% of the students at STAR are placed at STAR via the IEP. Probably 95% of kids have IEPs, but about 70 of our kids are placed by the districts and are funded by the districts. Interestingly, that's about a 180-degree switch from how it used to be here at STAR. It used to be more like 35 to 40%, and then the remaining used to be private pay families. So it's an interesting change in those percentages. And I think a large part of that is much more awareness and better advocacy on the parts of parents and advocates, and really helping districts understand when they might need to make placements in that regard. And of course, the increased rates of identification of students with significant learning needs. Oversight of the IEP students, if your child's here funded by a district, will be done by me. Your child would have a case manager who would be their teacher, and then I would oversee the case management and do the interface with the districts. On the private funded side, the interdisciplinary plan is what this stands for, the ID. About 30% of the kids here are on IDs, and the oversight of the case management of these students is done by Claudia, who's our Director of Curriculum and Instruction. I always think it's interesting to look at who we serve, and when I say primary eligibility category, this is part of the formal or technical languages that are used in special education to describe different student conditions. SLD is specific learning disability, and that covers a whole range of different situations. It could be a child who's dyslexic. It could be a child who has kind of a skewed learning profile where they might have great strengths in math, but they can't read at all. Or it could be a child who has great cognitive capacity, but their academic scores are significantly below what we see via testing that they're capable of learning. So that covers a whole host, and this year that's definitely the lion's share of the students that we are working with here. Autism continues to be a significant percentage of our students on all sides, all ranges of the spectrum really, but the other category, and a lot of these overlap, of course. These are just the primary. If we have to look at what a student presents with and where their challenges lie, typically it's not just one. There's usually a combination, but we just looked for the purposes of this, of the primary. What was their most pressing area of challenge? OHI stands for other health impairment, and that could be the lion's share of the kids here that fall into that category are those with ADHD. We also have students who may have an underlying medical condition that led to their disability that would fall into this category. Vision impairment would fall there. Students who may have had chromosomal or genetic anomalies, they might fall into this category as well. We have a really interesting and diverse student population, so we see kids with a very wide range of different profiles. ID is for intellectual disability. That makes the students there make up about 7% of our population. And then we get further out, SLI is speech and language impaired. That's a pretty small percentage of our population, not because our kids don't need speech. The majority of our kids do need speech services, but it's rare that that will be a primary. Usually they're kids who also have a learning disability, maybe they're dyslexic with significant needs, or many, many kids on the autism spectrum also have significant social pragmatics or speech needs, but they usually qualify under here, and then they get these services as a support. And then ED is emotionally disturbed, and that makes up the smallest portion of our population. I looked at this year and last year to see how it may have changed, and SLD, the specific learning disability, jumped in front as the primary area. We went up about 10% in these types of students. We stayed relatively the same with the numbers of students who are on the autism spectrum and have an other health impairment. This dropped a little bit intellectual disability, and these stayed still the smallest two categories. So we do tell parents, and if you remember from your orientation, the list of who we serve and the different situations, there are about 20 different bullet points. But really the piece that we look at when we consider a student placing here at STAR are, can they navigate a classroom? Can they manage transitions well? Can they be in a classroom environment and be regulated enough and focused enough to be able to access the curriculum? Okay, let's go back to the two different processes, the IEP and ID, and let's look at what's similar between these two processes. And I peppered our presentation with slides of our kids because they're so sweet and beautiful, and you'll see them throughout, and a couple of you might recognize a few of these guys. Both processes have annual team meetings, and in those annual team meetings, you will have the full team present. So all of the case managers, all the specialists who work with your student will be present. And I know parents love these meetings and would love more of these meetings, and we'll talk about that as we get a little further into the presentation. Both processes have triennial testing. On the way in, if your student is placed privately, we gave a full battery of assessments to determine what your child's areas of strengths and challenge are, what kind of program we need to set up for them, what kind of services might they need to be able to access the curriculum. So we really need to do that deep dive on the way in, and then we also do it every 3 years. The amount of testing and the type of testing that they'll get on the triennial basis will really depend on what their areas of need are. If we've been working with your child for 3 years and we know that they don't have a need for speech and language services, maybe on the triennial testing we won't test in that area, but you'll be part of that conversation. So district at triennial time every 3 years, they too do a full battery of testing. Sometimes the districts want to do all of their own testing. Sometimes they want us to do all of the testing. It just depends on the district. And sometimes it's half and half. But almost always the district will always do the psychological testing. We don't do that testing here, and then we share the other sorts of testing. In each plan, the IEP and ID, they both include measurable goals. They both delineate the services for your student, accommodations for the student. All of these key pieces that would be familiar territory in the IEP, you'll see in the ID process as well. A few differences that you may not see in the ID document, the accommodations as clearly articulated as they might be in an IEP document, because so many accommodations are embedded when your child is in an NPS or non-public school placement. It's just standard for us, so we don't spell out access to a smaller environment, access to sensory tools or assistive technologies assumed here. Yes?
For those families who are here privately but want to go back into public schools, having those accommodations spelled out could possibly be a good thing.
You bet.
Is there a way to ask for that?
Absolutely. Excellent point. And we'll talk about when families are here privately and want to seek district funding a little bit later in the presentation. Talk about that. Yes, it's an excellent point. No, and it is an important thing to be thinking about strategically, how to position yourself there. Okay, and going down a little further here, both processes, the plans are reviewed, the goals are reviewed and revised annually, so it's not a stuck in time, it's constantly being looked at and updated. Both plans, your child will get quarterly goal updates, so you'll have a clear idea of how your child's progressing on all of the goals every quarter, and then again at the end of the year. We take notes and document everything that happens in the meeting. Parents, students, guardians are key players on the team, and you get copies of everything, all the notes that are taken, ideally at that time at the end of the meeting, but certainly after, if it's not right then, slightly after. Hi, Daniel. And please feel free to stop with any questions. Okay, let's talk about some of the differences between these two processes. The IEP is a legal document, so it's a formal legal document, and as with any good legal document, there's going to be a lot of legalese and jargon and language, so it's not maybe as reader-friendly, user-friendly as the ID document, but there are some key required components that we have to cover in the IEP that we don't have to cover in the same way in the ID. The district technically is the owner of the IEP since they are funding, and so they are at the table an active partner in creation of this document. Some of the pieces that you'll see spelled out in the IEP that you wouldn't see necessarily delineated in the ID document would be statewide testing, because it doesn't apply for your student if they're not a public school student. Special factors page is a page where we delineate if a student is deaf or hard of hearing, or has behavior needs, or has assistive technology needs. And those pages have to be filled out as a way to justify the services on the IEP document. In the ID process, we don't have to justify the services in the same way. We'll certainly take it on the notes page. The student needs access to XYZ assistive technology, or use of elevator or support, whatever it is. But the language will be a little different in how we articulate that. The districts have to concur with the plan when it's an IEP. And it's a more formal process there. Any changes that we would want to make, or updates or revisions, say, to a goal, it requires a formal team meeting and note-taking and signatures and consents. So it's a more technical process for sure when it's in the IEP process. And I think the big difference, the paperwork. The IEPs, as you know, a lot of reports, a lot of formal paperwork. Yes?
Just curious, do both parents have to be at the IEP?
They don't.
meeting? Okay.
Yeah, just one. And we also, I know if it's a IEP meeting that maybe one parent's at work, one parent can be present, you can always call in. We have conference line if that's easier, or come in for a portion of it. A lot of flexibility there. We want to make sure it works for you. There are a lot of great best practices, I think, that are inherent to the IEP process that helps inform what we do with both types of documents. The IEP, in both the IEP and ID, will give a present levels update, and that really informs how the student is doing, not only in their specialist sessions, but in their classroom work as well. And that's really important because we want to make sure that the kids have the ability to generalize any of the skills that we're doing and remediating with them in a classroom environment. So this present level update from the specialist and the class teacher leads to the identification of needs. What are the students' area of challenge, which then leads to the goals in that area to support these needs, which then drives services. So it's a really clean and logical flow, and we use that same process in the ID process. Just want to see if there's any. All right, so best practices continued with the IEP. And I think there's been a shift too over the last couple of years, is including a lot more objective ways of measuring the student progress in the classroom. I think in the past, a lot of those objective measures and reports and data came from the specialist. And over the last 2 years, a lot more you'll see from the teaching side in the classroom, a lot more objective data from the teachers coming into the IEP process, because we are really focused on, can the child take those skills learned in the one-to-one session and really apply them in a classroom setting. Solid, measurable goals and baselines. We're really going to be using data to establish what the baseline is for your student, and then where we want them to be at the end of a 12-month period. And also we talked about accommodations as well. What will they need to help get them to this goal attainment? We do have in the services, when we're talking about IEPs for a moment, we do speech, counseling, occupational therapy, Slingerland, multisensory language arts. We have a full range of different modalities, not all of which will be spelled out in the IEP. The Slingerland services and the multisensory language arts services are considered non-mandated services, so they're not shown up on the grid, the service grid in the IEP. Sometimes that confuses people. If my child gets those services, how come they're not in the IEP? They're not considered to be legally mandated services. Let's see here, and then looking at the IEP documents are typically used to drive the placement decisions, but not only always written to reflect STAR's environment. So some districts will say, give us every accommodation listed, even if it's embedded. So if the child picks up and moves to a different school, we know what we need to do to educate them. And some say they're in an NPS setting, it's very in tune, it's very embedded, all of these supports, and intuitive, we don't need to spell it out. There's slight variation district to district, so you might see some slight differences there. Thinking about the district interface and STAR and the parents' role in that and how that all comes together, I think the best way to describe that oops, let's go this way, is a tango. It's a dance. And like any partnership, I think the more we work together, the smoother the outcome, the better the outcome. And I know for parents and talking to parents, sometimes before getting here, the IEP process could be really stressful and difficult, and the relationships with the districts might be fractured. There might not be a lot of trust. And it's very stress-inducing to think about stepping back into that arena. So our goal here is to really help build a bridge to really make that relationship and that partnership as positive as it can be for everyone, because it's no fun to have stressful IEP meetings. I know we've all been in them, or maybe not all, but a lot of us have been in them. So some of the things when people ask, all right, how does it work when my child's placed here on the IEP? I, as the parent, used to have to drive everything and get the meetings going and ask for this and that. Well, you don't have to do that when you get here. So usually, as I'm the case manager of the IEPs, I'll reach out to the district staff, or some districts reach out to me. They're very proactive, and let's get those meetings on the schedule. Let's get it set up. We take care of all the file transfer, making sure that we have electronic access to everything, to your child's old IEPs, to the history, to the reports, make sure that all that gets communicated to the team. They know what your students' goals are and accommodations are. We take over that piece, so you don't have to case manage the interface between the districts and STAR. I feel like it's really important that we get out in front of it, and that we also, for the district, it can be kind of stressful for them, and I want them to know that we know what we're doing, we understand the workings of the IEP document and how to run the meetings, and it will be smooth and timelines will be hit, and we know what we're doing. So I think there's probably stress on both sides, and if we just keep that communication really strong back and forth, and a lot of timely communication between all parties, we can really get to a place where it's a smoother, much smoother experience. I always think of the golden rule being no surprises. If there are things that the parents are hoping for that the district may not know about, I may call the district ahead of time in the meeting and say, hey, what do you think about this or that? Or if the district is thinking about something the parent might not know, I might front load the parent, just so no one comes in feeling blindsided by anything. We do work with 17 different school districts around the Bay Area, and the people who oversee the case management of IEPs at these 17 different districts turn over all the time. It's a really high stress job, I think. So trying to make sure that when they come here, they can see that we've got this, we know how to manage and navigate the IEP process, so they don't have to feel like they've got to hold this and they don't know the players. That's stressful. When you step into an IEP meeting here, there's going to be a clear agenda, it's going to be well facilitated. I will have talked to the folks ahead of time, all the paperwork will be in place there. And we just want things to run smoothly so we can just focus on the work at hand.
Like we did when we were in the district, do we get the proposed goals?
That's right, yes. So Michelle's referring to, in both processes, ideally you get those goals in advance, a draft of the goals in advance of the meeting. We really want you to think about it ahead of time. And if you know, hey, I've got a meeting coming up, it's really important to me that I see goals in this area, or I'm very concerned about this or that area, feel free to communicate with your child's case manager. That's ideal. We love it when parents say, hey, these are the areas my child really struggles with executive functioning, or I'm really concerned about their ability to organize their thoughts in an essay or their writing. Boy, spelling's a real trigger, or gosh, I'm really concerned about their math. Whatever, if you've got some burning concerns, the more you can let us know about that in advance. We take all that into account as we draft this IEP. Typically, the STAR team, just our in-house STAR team, will meet in advance of the meeting and just say, okay, what are your areas of goals? What are you thinking about writing goals around? What are you seeing in the classroom? A specialist, what are you seeing in your sessions? So that we're all clear on what we're thinking are the priorities. And then if we know that in advance from the parent side, that informs the work that we'll do and the goals we'll present to you. And they're drafts. Everything's a draft. We don't make any predetermination, so you come into those meetings. I mean, it's really nice to get feedback in advance, like, oh, this looks good, but I really want to see it here at this level or that level. And not on the technical aspects. We don't expect parents to, write the standard that accompanies the goal. That's our job. But if there's something that you think is important that you don't see in the drafts, let us know ahead of time, and we'll talk about it at the meeting. If we feel like, well, we meet that need, we serve the child with that in a different way, we'll explain that to you. The goal is not to have 50 goals for each child, to be perfectly honest. I mean, our kids have a lot of areas of need. There's no question about it. We cannot go after all of them at one time. We always look at it from the lens of what are the priorities. Sure, many of our kids could have 25 or 30 goals, but that's not going to be good use of their time or the specialist time. We'll be so busy trying to give a little bit to all these different goals, but we really want to focus on the core skills that will impact multiple areas of disability or challenge. So it's not that we don't think all of those things are important, but we've got to be realistic about what we can accomplish and what the student can accomplish, and what are those key areas. The kids work hard. They have long days here, small classroom sizes, individual and small group specialist sessions. We're pushing into the areas that are hard for them to do. So we want to be mindful of also balancing that with recess and art and music and PE and friendships and social things, because we want school to be a positive and fun experience. Alrighty, so partnership, making the process as smooth as possible definitely is the goal. This says it all. Keeping calm, having it be positive. It was kind of funny. I realized that, okay, it's not just me knowing that IEPs can be stressful for parents. This actually existed on the web, you guys. I just did a search. I'm like, okay, this idea came to mind, this Keep Calm poster, and I thought, oh, I'll probably have to get an editable version. And I couldn't find an editable version that was free. I'm like, I'm just going to, for the heck of it, see if there is one. And there was one that existed like this. So I think that tells a story right there. So. Okay, let's talk about what is the district interface when we have privately placed student, and it kind of addresses your question earlier. The difference here is that the STAR staff is not part of the IEP team when your child is not placed here funded by the district. So there is an IEP team which includes you and the district staff, but STAR is not at the table, not formally part of that team. With that said, however, we definitely want to support your process, and here are the ways in which we do that. Providing written updates. You might need the teacher or the math teacher to provide a paragraph about how your present levels, basically, how your student's doing in class. What are the most recent reports or assessment scores or report card, anything like that, we're happy to provide. Providing access to the students. A lot of times the districts, with the parents' permission, will say we'd like to do a classroom observation, we'd like to have a place to do an assessment. If you give us consent to do that, we're happy to provide that access for the district staff, and talking with them as you give us permission to do so, to give them a sense of how the child's doing in the program and where we see their areas of challenge. This is a really important piece that I think sometimes gets confusing for families. We don't advocate for your placement for your child to be placed here at STAR. That is not our job. So that's the job of people like Susan, who's an advocate, and lawyers, and you parents. We contract with both districts and parents. You're both our clients per se. And so our job is really to provide the programs and services and progress monitor on the students, but it's not to help families secure the placement here at STAR. Are there any questions on that piece? Beth?
It's a tricky one, and I get it.
Yeah,
Very
it
tricky.
is.
So I'm not district funded. I am angry at the school district, feel like the school district has failed us. I'm in the process of doing an annual and plan to be smarter this time around. One of the things that I see or don't see on the ID that could be helpful, and without going like into too much specifics, but there's reasons why my child is able to learn in this environment.
Mm-hmm.
There are things about this environment that she could not get in the public school system, which is not relevant for you guys in terms of public school system, but can you expand a little bit more on that written input? And it's sort of like goals and how she's doing in class, and it's her report card, and maybe it's an interview with the teacher or some notes, having somebody on the phone with the teacher or asking for a short summary. But do you provide any kind of guidance in terms of how to present this information, how to frame the information? Because like I know that she's doing well in this area here because of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, accommodations and supports and personalities and style and setting. Those things don't necessarily translate easily in writing. In a public school setting, she would not have all of those things unless they did some things, and not all schools can do those things.
Right.
Do you understand my question?
I think so, and I think it's a combination of, and your point was a good one. If you're an ID family who is seeking district funding, I think it's totally fair to say, and I'll talk with Claudia about this, to have us delineate the accommodations more specifically that show, boy, this child needs a smaller class, maybe. Putting numbers in there is not always the best, but this is a student who needs sensory breaks every 15 minutes, access to a quieter testing environment. They need a copy of peer notes. Maybe they need an FM hearing system. You know, whatever it is, it has to be things we do here. It can't be just things we think would be cool and fun. But what we're doing here to be able to have the child access their education, I think that would be totally reasonable to have. And as a parent, if I'm going into those ID meetings this year and I know I'm going to be taking this document then to my district, I would ask the question, what are the things that you are doing here that allow her the tools to access her curriculum and have those written into the ID meeting notes? So I think articulating the accommodations would be key. A lot can be told from the service plan and the goals. Those should absolutely articulate exactly what you just asked. What is the need and how are we serving that need? That document should lay all of that out for the district, and then having the parents say, and here's what I see, bringing in your perspective. But the document should speak volumes by virtue of having clear, objective, measurable data as present levels, measurable baselines, goals, progress monitoring, accommodations, and notes. I mean, it should just really lay it out. So,
I think that my consultant really helped with a lot of those things that you
yes,
just mentioned.
yes, I would agree. And that was my next point, is to have, because it is hard to be, you know, in a past life I used to be a nurse, and when my child was in the ER, it was like nurse brain, mom brain, nurse brain, mom brain. When you're in the IEP, you're mom. You don't want to be advocating. You want to be able to just really have that different role. And if you can, and if you have the resources to hand that off to an outside professional, or at least get a consult with them before going in to help game plan and strategize, I would recommend that, because I know it can be an overwhelming / intimidating experience. And practice, and take notes. And
Not just overwhelming as a parent, but at least in my district, parents are not seen as equal members of the team, the IEP team. They're just parents. So if you have someone to advocate, they actually are taken more seriously, I think.
Yeah, and one last word, and then I know you had a comment, Michelle. There are parent advocacy organizations like Matrix who are really great and do a lot of workshops around IEP preparation and these sorts of conversations. And Michelle, does your group as well do education offerings?
Flow,
Yep.
flexible learning opportunities. We have a whole school year of parent meetings and speakers, and actually one of our first meetings will have the director of Matrix come. and
Excellent.
speak.
She's great. And there's a lot of parent resources out there to help strengthen. I just wanted to make clear that we are not those people who will do those things. But you both have given me good feedback that I'll bring back to Claudia about the articulating the accommodations more.
Just a little bit of a kind of follow-up stuff.
Yeah.
Look, I'm thinking about my daughter's schools from last year, and we're about to go into the ID meeting in a couple weeks. You were talking about the ID goals, so it's not necessary I'm not talking about IEP, I'm talking about
Yeah.
Depending upon how the child is assessed, it wouldn't necessarily, this is a high schooler, be necessary to have a history goal or a science goal.
Right.
It might be more appropriate to have goals related to her ability to take material and use it.
Right. Totally.
It
Yes.
wouldn't necessarily become a speech therapy goal, but it would be a goal that all of the teachers
That's right.
would use.
Frequently, that's how it is in the high school. Special education teaching team holds the goals. I mean, yes, you're exactly right. Because that same skill to read a text and be able to pull out salient point, use a graphic organizer to organize those points, and then write that 3 to 5 paragraph essay with grammar, punctuation, et cetera. Yes, that's a global skill across multiple classes and curricular areas. Yeah, you're totally right about that. Did you have a point? Okay, great. Oh, sorry, Judy.
So you said that the methodologies for a goal are not in the IEP, in the ID.
The Slingerland,
For example.
yes,
like-
yes,
right?
yes. Usually we don't spell out curriculum or methodologies because it may change from location to location.
But my concern is that, a lot of times the goals could be the same, like in the sense but because the public school doesn't really use the right methodologies that your child may. For example, in our case, I feel like my son benefits from the VB method and Linda method. But the public school, they don't even know about it. or even they know like that it's for specialists or teacher doesn't know. So sometimes a child cannot reach that goal because they're not using evidence-based strategies, which you guys are using. You know, so it's kind of like good to embed that.
Sure.
Because, you know, that is one of the reasons that they could be failing.
Right.
Right, because they're not using the evidence-based strategies. And in his case, he was put in a group of kids with similar goals, even though their primary diagnoses were different. So, you know, it's kind of like trying to just.
And I think where that shows up, Jody, is not in the goal, but in the document. So your child's schedule, their program, and the ID document, it'll be documented in the notes that they see Wyatt for visualizing, verbalizing, and their schedule, it'll have it right on there. So that is part of the whole package. We typically don't put it in the goals because it locks us into one methodology. What if we get in and we realize, you know what, this child isn't really ready for this methodology, we're going to try something different. We need to have that flexibility. But it is documented in the process. Yes, yes,
So
yes.
it's part of the, it doesn't have to be in the goal, but it's part of the ID document.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I guess this is to reiterate that the ID, documentation should be just as robust as the IEP.
Mostly. Some of the technical things like the statewide testing, some of those things I mentioned earlier, you're not going to see, but the meat of what's in the IEP, yes, is definitely in the ID document.
Especially the goals and the benchmark.
Hugely important. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Are you going to talk about transition plans?
Yes, we can talk about those. I don't have a specific slide on that. Let's talk about it now.
I asked because
It's great.
I went to a fabulous training at Matrix Parents last week. Small, tiny group where they
Great.
took the IEP document and went through it line by line and talked about what should be in there and how that process works. It was fabulous. They're going to keep doing that. You should check out Matrix Parents. One of the things I learned is that during the school year, when your child turns 16, the IEP has to include a transition plan. Well, that's where we are right now. And we haven't had our ID meeting yet, but do we try to do something similar?
Yes, so with all the IEPs, for sure, they have the formal transition planning document, which, you know, it's it's not the, I would say, the heart of the IEP necessarily, and some are much better than others, and I still feel like it's this mythical thing. There's a lot of cloud and confusion around what it is and how to fill it out, but the essence is important. It's the transition goals that we write into the IEP, and you'll get those goals in the ID. Really, it's what do we need to do to get this child ready for the transition they are ready to make. Yes, we will do it. Yes, we will include goals around that for your child. So I think as your child is now coming of age at 16, that would be excellent feedback for the team. I'd like to start thinking about the transition and what skills I need or the child needs to be ready to move into that arena. The transition plan document is really, and Alex is young. In freshman year, we're focusing on independence. We're focusing on, in high school, pulling back the teacher prompts as much as possible. We're decreasing the level of individual services. Typically, we want the child to be in the classroom more. The high school teachers hate losing the kids because they don't want them out of that academic content, because there's a lot to do in the high school program, especially on the diploma track pathway. So these are natural seeds to that transition plan. We start to articulate more formalized transition goals as a child gets a little bit later into their high school years. We start doing things like we have a transitions class and career interest inventorying. We start bringing in agencies like Danny's Department of Rehabilitation and meet with families. How do I determine eligibility? What services do you provide for my student? We employ a transition consultant who comes in and works with you and your child individually at the senior year level to determine areas of needs, strengths, interests, to create a specialized plan that's very robust and much, much deeper than what's in the IEP document. So Beth, in answer to your question, we absolutely are thinking about it from high school forward. When we know kids are moving out at the end of 8th grade, we want to start thinking about it that 8th grade to the less restrictive environment setting or high school setting. And how it looks for each individual child, slightly different. I will tell you it's one of our areas of curricular focus this year is developing transition readiness protocols. We have it locked in for the kids who are graduating high school and moving into that post-secondary space. We got that base covered, both IEP and ID, and it's written into both documents. That piece is great. Where I think we need to be thinking about it a little bit more is when kids transition out, maybe they're 6th grade and they're going back to a district school or a less restrictive environment. What are we doing to get them ready, and how are we determining when they are ready? Those are the places now I want us to start thinking about, because the transition for our guys is challenging, and so we want to make sure that we have ample time, we really build whatever skills that we feel they need to be able to get them ready to be successful. I don't know, I want to make sure I fully addressed your question. Okay, you'll be hearing more and more about it as they get through the high school, for sure. And I went to that same workshop, it was a great one last year.
I didn't go to the transition meeting because we're not
That's right.
anywhere close
Yeah,
to
yeah.
there yet. Well, when you gave that speech and you were talking about transition, it's mostly what you were just talking about from high school and on and stuff like that. But there's also transition maybe after third or fourth or fifth grade or sixth grade.
That's right.
And that doesn't have to be just here for sixth grade and then completely move them over. I learned in my last meeting with the district that they can do
Step down.
They'll start doing a class over there, or then 2 classes.
That's right.
And so I had no idea about that. Will
Yeah.
you give any sort of?
Yeah, we'll talk about when a child's ready. We have a few kids that we're entering into that conversation now. And I think that's a really great way to go for some kids in some programs. It depends on the willingness of the incoming school, and most of them, of course, if they're in our home base in Marin, yes, we can manage that. If they're far, in Oakland, it's going to be much harder, and typically we don't get the luxury of doing it that way. But absolutely, we work in partnership to figure out what's the best time of day that the child could be out, what makes the most sense for that program, for this program, what's our timeline, what's the end game. Yeah, we definitely work together with that.
And then to see if it's right, because there's a goal built, what I understand, and if they're not meeting the goal, then that means, okay, maybe it's too soon for transition.
Yes, I haven't seen it yet, go that direction if a child is transitioning out and it doesn't work and then they come back. Typically, that's not the trajectory. Typically, we know they're ready to move to that less restrictive setting, and there might be some bumps along the road, but we can reconfigure and, give them the extra support that they might need. But yeah, it's to really support the transition for the kids at whatever point they exit out. It's not just the high school going into post-secondary. But just because we're on that high school to post-secondary, all of you, whether your student is here at STAR or not, really start to educate yourselves about the options that exist for your kids when they leave high school. And we will have in the spring Explore Your Options Fair. We'll do that again this year, and even though your children are younger, some of you, I still urge you to come and just see. We'll have lots of vendors, different programs. It's so exciting too for the kids to start to think of, okay, college and what's out there and accessible for me. We just want to start building that dream, that vision, and that's open to the public. We just want to help get that information out there. We'll have individual workshops as well, and speakers to help parents really understand and navigate that landscape. Great, thanks for all this great dialogue on this topic. I know it's an important one. Okay, let's look at just the differences quickly here, meeting frequency and timelines. So when you're coming in on an IEP, typically legal mandate is that we will meet within 30 to 45 days. We're going to take the IEP document that came with your child from their district. STAR team is going to look at it. If the goals and the services look reasonable for our setting, we will leave them as is until the annual anniversary date. We'll still meet as a team with you and the whole full team of providers at the table. We'll talk about the student's schedule, the program, the services that we'll do here. If we want to tweak the goals, we'll do that. If not, we'll implement the IEP as written. And then the next meeting would be at the annual IEP meeting. All of the kids here get the annual IEP, which is typically the anniversary of their entry date into special education. And then I'm sure you're familiar with the triennial. Years they'll get testing done. Sometimes the district does the testing, sometimes us, sometimes a combination of both. You parent have to consent. You can request sorts of testing. You can say no thank you, I don't want that kind of testing. You have a voice in all of these places, and hopefully by the time we get to these conversations you're feeling comfortable and supported in that environment to have those conversations. But if you have any questions about, okay, I've got testing coming up and I don't know what kind of testing and I'm confused about this process, call me. I'm happy to walk you through it or talk to you through it. And then other meetings as arranged. There are amendment meetings, again with the IEP, because it's a legal document. We can't just all get together and have a conversation, quick team meeting, brainstorm, change the plan, and go on. We have to do it legally, formally. Everyone has to consent to it. Everyone has to be invited. So I try, this is a lot of people at the table, and I always look at it, as much as I love having these really big, deep conversations, when I'm in a meeting for, 3 hours with 10 people around the table, I'm thinking, who's missing their speech and their OT and all of those services? So I want to make sure that you have a full team present for the full focus at least once a year, but we're going to at these meetings, and if there's something specific, like, I've got concerns about what's happening in OT, I'm worried about my child not meeting the goal, we're going to first say, please talk to the child's OT, see what they think. If you don't get the answer that you want or that you feel is satisfactory, go up to the child's case manager, let's talk about that, let's see what kind of interface and conversation and communication can happen there. And if you still are not satisfied or don't feel your questions were addressed, then of course you can contact me. If we want to add another meeting, if something comes up, like it's clear, if a child's not meeting their goals halfway through and it looks like they are not on trend to meet those goals annually, then we've got something we need to talk about. We've got to figure out why. Is the goal too lofty? Does the goal contain too many things? That's a big thing sometimes. Do we have the right services plugged in for the child? That would be, well, yeah. So that would be a thing if I see they're not trending, or specialists are great or teachers are great. If they're worried about a student, the student is shut down during sessions, they are not accessing the curriculum, really worried about where they're going, we'll do an in-house STAR meeting and figure out, all right, what are we thinking, what do we think needs to happen, and then we might call an amendment meeting and say, all right, parents and district, let's come to the table, let's strategize. Or you might say, I'm concerned, and then this might lead to an amendment meeting. Your rights and responsibility are to request a meeting when you feel something is amiss. That is your right as a parent in either of these two processes. What we might do is to say, where are your areas of concern? Who have you talked to? Let's see if we can address it before having to go to this, and if not, we'll go to this. We're not going to deny you that for sure. I just want to I want us to work smart and get you the responses and get the students the progress that we want to see. We're going to have an initial meeting within 45 to 60 days with your full team. The timeline's a little bit longer here, but within 30 days of a child starting the program here, you will have a set of goals, new goals, reflecting their areas of need. With the ID privately placed students, you also get an annual meeting, and you do get new goals and service review of service plan every year. So it's annually renewed, and the full team is present at those meetings. We do triennial testing here, and you'll be part of determining what testing seems appropriate to do. The only testing that we don't have the expertise in-house to do, is the psychoeducational or neuropsych evaluation. If the team feels like that's an important piece, that we're really seeing some big shifts in the way the child's processing information, we may say it really would make sense to have a neuropsych report done at this juncture. We wouldn't recommend that any more than every 3 years. And when a child gets older, sometimes it's, you really have to talk about the value of having a 17-year-old have a full neuropsych. Do we really expect there to be significant changes in the way that their brain is functioning? So those are the kind of conversations we'll have. And then other meetings, a partial team might be present if it's a specific content area that you're worried about. And I know it's really great to have these meetings and meet with everyone, but it's sometimes logistically can be really tricky. We've got about 50 of our kids are IEP students, so we know we're going to have at least these meetings for every new student, and we're going to have this meeting at least times 50, and we're going to have this for several others, hopefully combined with this. So we've got a busy slate. So we will. We also want to let parents know, what are your other communication options? And parent conferences, October, March, please come to those. Typically, these are with your child's teaching team. You can request a specialist present if you'd like them to be there. Teachers really guard that time, though. They love to talk with you, and really, it's really wonderful to hear, how's your child doing in the classroom? What's going on socially? How are they navigating moving from room to room? How are they doing on turning in their homework? Are they participating in class? All of those things are things that the teachers will want to be talking with you about. I didn't put up here, and I should have, Back to School Night is our first kickoff event of the year. That is definitely a key event to come to, because that's going to be the big picture, and especially in the high school where we have so many different teachers working with your kids. It's a different experience there, because just like in a neurotypical or gen ed high school program, your students are moving from space to space and having to work with many different personalities and expectations, but we will have some of the same processes in place, like use of the Google Classroom. So you want to go to Back to School Night to get the big classroom structural overview. Then you'll want to come to the parent conferences to find out about how your child's doing in the classroom. Your case manager, your child's case manager is your point person for any questions regarding your child's program or services. I don't know who to talk to about X, Y, or Z. You can always call them as a starting point or email them. All of you should have received an email from your child's case manager about a week ago that had your child's schedule, the full list and contact information for every team member so that you know how to contact them, and you can do that directly. Contacting individual teachers, and that's if you had a PE or the art and something came up in art, you should have the art teacher's email information. Feel free to contact him or her directly. And then if you still feel like you need more support and you don't have your questions answered, you can certainly bring Claudia or I in. This is a question that parents ask about, I always do this. I wrote notes to make sure that I don't forget to add anything off the slide, and then I don't look at my notes because I get rolling here. So I just want to. Should we keep the IEP? I think our little buddy here, Aaron, really research and think about what the value of this would be. So the pros, even if you decide, we have some families who place their student here privately and they're not even going to entertain the possibility of a district placement. Why would they ever want to consider keeping the IEP active? Well, one is you just don't know. I mean, things change. I think it's important to think about what is the district offering. Annually, they are required to have a meeting with you. They are required to review the IEP document. They are required to review the student's progress and formulate a plan of care, which would include goals and a placement. You'll hear a lot in special education about LRE, or access to a less restrictive environment, and that really means that students with learning differences should be educated with students without learning differences as much as possible. That's the law. So you always want to know and keep track of, maybe in some school districts, the elementary district is different from the high school district. So when your child matriculates to the high school district, you might not have any idea what those high school programs look like. And I think it's a good idea that you do, because who knows what your child's needs might be in the future. So if you keep that IEP active, you have access to go check those options out and potentially be a fit down the road. Transition and post-secondary options. So we run a post-secondary program here. We're in our second year of it, and it's wonderful, and there's no question that we can provide that support. But some districts really feel strongly that they want the post-secondary kids having the transition services in the home district. And I understand that to some degree, because travel training in their home district, connecting with their local junior college and get them enrolled with their local Department of Rehab or their service providers to do independent living skill support. I get that, that makes sense. And if you've got that IEP active, you will have access to this. If your child does not have their high school diploma, you will have access to these types of options. So it just gives you options to keep everything as a possibility. You've got an current IEP document, and you move to Texas, you've got a legal document that then also translates there, and maybe they have fabulous services there, and without that active IEP, it's going to be harder. It's going to be just one more step to have access to that. And then Danny, who represents Department of Rehab, if you've got an active IEP, you've got eligibility for some of those other ancillary services, which are really important for the student. And if your child is going to graduate with a high school diploma and they want to go to a junior college afterwards and they've got an active IEP, they have access to all the accommodations, and that's a huge one. If they don't have the IEP, then they would have to have a neuropsych report that's current within some districts. Some colleges want it to be 18 months, some want it to be 3 years, but you could avoid that by this. So there are reasons to consider having that and be thinking about that, even if you never think you'll put your child in a district program. Typically, kids are here for 3 years, so we are always thinking about, that's not a long time, what do we need to do from the day they hit the front door to when they go out, and how we best get them ready for that next setting. And I think we want parents to also be thinking about that. I do see sometimes by the time parents land here, it's such a relief, and you don't have the stress, and there's a little PTSD that has to get worked through. This is really common. And I get that, and we'll let you all settle down and settle in, and then we're going to start nudging to be thinking about the future. In every IEP meeting, they ask, when it comes to placement decisions, does this continue to be the best placed placement for your child? Does it continue to be the least restrictive environment in which we can educate them? Because that's the standard which we should always be looking at. So it's not that we're trying to nudge you out the door, but we're always thinking globally in that way. And of course, the cons are about, it can be a stressful process. You might not have trust with the district. You might not want to have them involved in your student's situation. I understand that. But maybe factoring all of these things in with all of these things. And if you're not hinging on getting the placement at STAR, maybe it's not such a stressful experience. You can just go in, get the information, see what they're offering. Thank you very much. I don't agree with the placement. We'll continue to keep them privately placed. But now you've just kept all your options open. Something to think about. Love that picture of Michelle's son. All right, questions, comments? Carolyn?
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
One's really simple. You mentioned matrix, which you've told me about before, but you also said flow.
Yes, flow is flexible learning opportunities.
Okay, and that is.
And it's just it's local in Marin, excuse me, and it was started by, I think, 5 women that kind of aged out. And so that's why myself and a woman named Marie Gaffney is running it right now. And we're a little bit late getting the calendar out for the year. My apologies, but we will be getting that out shortly. But if you go to the website, we'll give us maybe one more week. We're trying to finalize the date.
FLO.
FLO, yeah, flexible learning opportunities. And I think it's, I'll look it up and I'll let you know before the end of the meeting what the website is. But yeah, we have meetings once a month, just about in San Samuel during the school year.
Okay, and then I have a couple more. One is you said, you have the right to request any and all testing.
You have the right. It doesn't mean they'll do it or agree to it.
Right, so like knowing that, I'm suddenly wondering, is there sort of a list of what sort of
Sure.
those tests are? Because obviously my daughter's had tons of extensive
Right.
testing, but maybe there's some testing that I don't know that I don't know.
Right, right.
Would it be-
You know what, that's a really good question. I might be tempted, so I'm thinking about the assessment plan document spells out certain areas. It'll spell out academic, psychological testing, the standard ones, OT, occupational therapy, speech, those sorts of things. And then there's an other box, and there's not a known list necessarily that I know of. And tell me if you know of anything different, Susan, but I would say the district, I would put the question to them, what are my options? It's kind of like navigating. What's,
I would ask Dretta or an advocacy group. I wouldn't ask the district.
Okay.
Because they're going to tell you that you don't have as many options as what you actually do.
We're also neuropsychologists
Yeah.
or psychologists.
Yeah.
You know, I know we used to keep a list of all the different tests that my colleague used to do.
are these, and let me make sure I'm understanding your question. Are you asking what are the testing possibilities that the district would do? Is that what you're asking?
Or what are the possibilities of assessments that would be helpful to?
Okay, so it's a little broader, yep.
Yeah.
Then I agree, probably, so you're maybe the,
Including outside experts.
yeah, I would say neuropsychologist then is going to be your big umbrella of what kinds of measures to use. Maybe that would be the question, areas and measures.
And state testing also.
I have a question. So when you're not in the district and you're getting an IEP, but you're like privately placed at STAR, and they offer you the IEP, if you don't sign it or you do sign it, what happens? Do you have to sign it and say, I just disagree, but I've signed it? Or if you don't sign it, is it not in action?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say that is a great question. So, and I'd love to hear feedback. My instinct to that, Susan, is there is a section right on the signature page where parents can say, I agree with everything but, or you can put any kind of note, I disagree with the goals, I disagree with the placement. I think signing it shows you were a participant. It's now a valid document. I mean, technically speaking, this is the other thing. If you're working with me, chase you down for the signature page on those goals. If we're in agreement, sometimes parents don't sign off because maybe they're not trusting. We're technically not able to work on your child's goals until you sign that document. We still will because we're not going to just hold and wait, but really, technically speaking, we need that signature. I think it makes sense to finish that process and articulate. You can go home. You don't have to, if there's any question, don't sign at the meeting. Read everything. Formulate your response. I disagree with boom, 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 and then sign it. And reference, see attached list of exceptions, exactly.
Always do that.
I disagree with different things, but I'm.
I participated in the process, though I disagree with blah, 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 blah. Yes, that's an excellent point, and you both had,
Yeah, I think the important part of that, though, is if you disagree with all of their final answers, then it's your right to ask for more, or ask for what you think your child needs. And it's on their responsibility to provide the answers to that. So that's usually where people get stuck.
I usually write, I would like my goals to be started right away. We'll be sending the exception later.
that's right, you
At a
can do,
later date.
exactly.
And then in the exception.
Exactly. And that helps us. We really appreciate that, Jody. So we can get to work on our part, and then you can hash out maybe some of the details of the IP.
I actually think there isn't a hard and fast answer to your question. We did not sign the IEP. We signed that we were present. We sent back a 3-page letter delineating what were the pieces in the IEP that we completely disagreed with, and reminded them that we had discussed it in the meeting. They wrote back a letter saying, thank you, but we disagreed. And we wrote back and said, we are unilaterally placing her in Star Academy, and we reserve the right to come back to the district to seek reimbursement. We didn't threaten them, we didn't say we're gonna.
Sure.
We just
Kept your-
left it
yeah.
like that. Then they left us alone, but then they called me 1 year later to say, oh, it's time to renew your IEP. And I thought, I guess they think that we have an IEP.
Yeah, even if you didn't sign it, they consider it to be active. But I just think about and this would be a good question to ask Matrix too, and maybe different advocates or different lawyers might have different perspectives. But if I think about keeping all my options open, I think to sign it with my exceptions, if I go across state lines, I've got a current signed IEP, but also to Beth's point, even if it's unsigned, technically speaking, it might be considered current. You might get to a district, and like the CDE comes in and does California Department of Education. They look through all of our IEPs to make sure that we are doing everything in compliance. And if they see an unsigned IEP, to them, that's not an active IEP. So it just depends. I wouldn't want to leave you without any options. And it just kind of finishes that conversation, and then I would expect annually that I'll receive a phone call from the district, or you might need to initiate that phone call if they're not placed here on an IEP. Carolyn.
Simple question. If it's an IEP, is the meeting itself held at the home district or here at Star?
If the child's placed here, always here.
Here.
Yep,
So the
and
people from the district
yes,
will travel.
yes.
Okay.
Or phone in, yes. Marin County, they like to meet, a lot of our Marin County schools, we will meet at the county office just a mile away, but usually it's always here.
This is more of a macro question. I know that each of the SELPAs has, to some degree, at least on paper, a community advisory committee.
That's right, that's right.
Where they like to get
Yep.
parents involved. And I know that Sonoma County has a brand new
Yes.
chairperson. And he's hoping to revitalize it because parents weren't interested.
Yeah.
I know that there was a very contentious meeting like 3 years ago at the CAC about transportation, which is apparently often a problem. But I wonder, do you have does STAR maintain any communication? Is there any linkages at all?
With CAC, it's Community Advisory Committee that Beth's referring to. So SELPA, again, this acronym, it's Special Education Local Plan Area, SELPA, is basically the group that disperses the funding to individual districts for special education students. So it's kind of the entity above that oversees. They're not overseeing your child's IEP, but they're overseeing the funding stream. And so they have interest in having the process be compliant, having the parties working together in partnership. So they'll frequently have these advisory committee meetings to bring stakeholders together to try to keep communication open and positive. I always encourage parents to be active in these organizations outside, and I think the more you know, the better, and the more you meet the faces and the people behind these decisions and these organizations, the better you can know each other better and understand each other better, to encourage you to participate. We don't have a formal relationship with the CAC, but I know the one here in Marin I think is pretty active. The Marin SELPA director is fabulous. I'm most closely connected with him because he's here in our backyard, and I call him and ask advice on certain things. So I work hard to keep a local relationship because that's what I can do here. But I think it is really important for parents. I think your question's a great one, and I think you putting up that email with those new meetings, it only makes sense, Beth, because you educate and support each other, and you might find out about things you otherwise wouldn't know of that could help your child.
Yeah, because I guess my broader question, I'm sorry I've taken so much time.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. I don't think I got to the meat of what you were
No,
asking.
You kind of did, but I guess I didn't articulate it well enough. I am aware because we're insulated here,
Mm-hmm.
and the school district isn't interested in what I think. And so I'm not going to try really hard, like between things.
Mm-hmm.
to
Right,
maintain a
sure,
great relationship
sure,
with
sure.
them. So as an insulated private school parent, but with an entire universe of public education.
Yeah,
around
how do
me,
you keep current and what's
is
our
the-
role in
how do
helping?
I figure, what's the California Department of Education, the Sonoma County, this, that, and the other, the school board that's under, several of which will be elected
Mm-hmm.
this coming fall. Like, what are these relationships, and how should I, as a private school parent, be navigating that?
Mm-hmm.
It's, it's not necessarily for this conversation, but I feel like that's a question that I don't even know what's the difference between all of them. That's the most clear explanation of self-help
No, it's good.
I've ever heard.
Oh, really? Oh, good. I did. Oh, good. I did a lot of research with SELPAs at my last school, so I know a lot more probably than I should. But I think your question, the heart of it, or your comment, the heart of it is a really important point, and that's to be educated. And initially you had asked, what's our interface with that? I feel a huge sense of responsibility that we provide these kinds of conversations and all the parent education offerings that we do each year, because you're right, you are in a private school world and you might be here for 3 or 4 or 5 years, but then what about what happens outside? That's the bigger picture, which is why agencies like Danny's, Department of Rehab, Golden Gate Regional, Integrated Community Services, we want to start bringing more of those groups in. Decoding Dyslexia as a group, a parent grassroots advocacy group that's going to start hosting meetings here. They bring another piece, an education component that we don't necessarily have to provide, but they do, and I want to connect parents with that. Matrix is a wonderful organization. Parent Advocacy Flow is another wonderful organization. I would say to link up with those that seem to be most aligned with your areas of interest and or your child's needs, and keep talking to each other. You are your own best resource, for sure. I hope
Can
that.
I give the website for Flow? That
Please.
is flowparents.com. And a couple of events that we had last year, we're going to do it again this year, that I think what people loved and was really helpful was panels. So at one panel we had an educational consultant, we had a neuropsych woman, I guess they're doctors,
PhDs.
doctors. We had a counselor that helps with, counseling, like a therapist, I guess. And who else? Anyway, we had,
A lot of
one
expertise.
person that each person throughout your team, everyone that you would need to go to help your
And
child.
this was based in this county.
In San Anselmo, yes.
Once you get your events together, let's get them up on the parent portal so parents can access everything and come to it. Yeah, there are a lot of great resources here, for sure. It's okay. Good. I just want to give a little shout out to Daniel, 9th grade Daniel, who's done a wonderful job with our projection. Sorry if I just clapped in your ear. I realize I'm still mic'd. Oh, okay, great. So you didn't get blasted there. Excellent.
And before you close.
Yeah,
is it
sure.
plug for the parents?
Please do.
Make sure that you're signed up to the parents portal on the Star Academy website. We're trying to gently and sweetly